Hello and welcome to the Woodman Outlook for 2022. In terms of the macro picture, next year should be a strong year for global growth. Recently, expectations for growth have been revised lower to around 4.4%, but that remains well above the potential rate of growth of the global economy. Expectations for 2023 have been revised higher to around 3.6%, still a very robust level of growth. Next year, we expect the bulk of the growth to come in the first half, with slower activity in the second half. Turning now to inflation. Recent publications have seen rising levels of consumer price inflation in Europe, but more particularly in the US and in the UK. We expect base effects to begin to slow the level of inflation from the second quarter of next year onwards. However, over the whole of the year, we expect inflation in the United States and the United Kingdom to remain above the central bank's target level. In Europe, in China, and in Japan, inflation levels are generally lower, and we expect them to remain well under control over 2022. Now, let's look at central bank policy. The US Federal Reserve has announced that it will accelerate the pace at which it reduces its asset purchases, and it now plans to hike rates 3 times in 2022. The European Central Bank, on the other hand, is likely to reduce its pandemic emergency purchase program, but will continue its asset purchases in other programs. And in China, the central bank is likely to ease policy modestly, given the slowdown in the property market and in the domestic economy. What are the risks to our macro outlook? One would be an unfavorable outcome in terms of inflation, i.e., rather than a slowdown, an acceleration. That would force the US Central Bank to tighten policy more aggressively. It would also impact consumer confidence. It would reduce consumers' disposable incomes, reducing, in turn, consumer spending. And that would end up in a marked slowdown in activity in the US. Regarding the pandemic, the risk is obviously the emergence of a new variant of the virus, more resistant to the vaccines. However, these risks are not our core scenario. They're areas that we monitor closely, but nonetheless, we still have a constructive view for the macro outlook in 2022. Now let's turn to look at fixed income markets. In the US, the central bank will be reducing and then stopping its new asset purchases. However, it will continue to reinvest the proceeds of maturing bonds on its portfolio, meaning that it will be able to influence the shape of the yield curve by targeting the maturities that it chooses to reinvest in. This means we think that financial repression, i.e., keeping bond yields below the level of inflation, is likely to continue. The European Central Bank will continue its asset purchases in 2022, and we expect only modest upside in government bond yields, with German 10-year bond yields trading around zero. In terms of corporate bonds, we see little of value, in particular in investment-grade bonds, given the fact that spreads, the difference in yields between corporate bonds and government bonds, are extremely tight at present. In emerging markets, we do see opportunities in Asia, and we have a particular focus on Chinese government bonds, which offer a real positive return, given the fact that inflation in China is below the level of government bond yields. The environment should remain favourable for corporate activity and hence favourable for equity markets. However, we don't expect any increases in valuations next year, given the rising rate environment, so returns are going to be driven by the growth in earnings. In the United States, the consensus expects growth of 7.5%, and multiples of earnings for 2022 are around 21.5 times. Rather expensive in our view. In Europe, valuations are lower at around 16 times next year's earnings, and earnings growth will be solid at around 6%, according to the consensus. In terms of sectors, we recommend broad diversification, highlighting nonetheless that in times of rising rates, it's sectors like banks and more cyclically sensitive companies that tend to do well. Let's turn now to currencies and commodities. In the very near term, interest rate differential expectations and the economic environment would tend to suggest that recent strength in the dollar and the Swiss franc will continue. However, beyond that, we expect that currencies will trade sideways in 2022, with little to look forward to in terms of major moves in one direction or the other. For commodities, the environment is rather strong in terms of global growth. That will be good for energy and industrial metals prices. And gold, we think, will continue to play a useful role in portfolios as a tail risk hedge against any downturn in global equity markets. And now to our convictions for 2022. Firstly, we expect real assets, that's to say equities and commodities, to outperform nominal assets, that's to say fixed income markets. That creates a problem for portfolio construction in that the advantages of combining equities and bonds will be less compelling going forward than they have been in recent decades. Within fixed income markets, we recommend a strong underweight in government bonds, underweight also in investment-grade corporate bonds, neutral on high yield where there is a bit more income to look forward to, and also neutral on emerging market bonds, although within that we're overweight Chinese government bonds. In terms of equities, real assets, we're overweight as we start 2022, but we're looking forward to higher levels of volatility, which may need some more tactical adjustments to exposure in 2022. With that, all of us at Woodman would like to take this opportunity to wish you and your families an excellent 2022. Bye-bye.